You may be clicking on this and asking yourself, why has Meg decided to film the intro to this video halfway through the project, and also why is she still in her pajamas at 1 p.m? And my answer to that is, mind your business. I'm having some health issues, okay? No biggie. We are about halfway through October. It's almost Halloween. I'm very excited. I don't have anywhere to go on actual Halloween except class and tech week for my one show that I'm in. But it's fine. I'm still going all out with a costume because of course I am. My roommate and I proposed the idea of being Pomni and Ragatha from the Amazing Digital Circus all the way back in May, and we have committed. I have been going ham on this since like mid-September. I came back from Colossal Con and was like, okay, time to immediately get back to work. I feel like every free moment that I'm not doing homework or in a class or rehearsal, I have been sewing or planning part of the costume. Oh wait, did I mention? I'm doing this all by hand because I still don't own a sewing machine. Yeah, maybe not my brightest idea. She's probably not going to be the most structurally sound, but so far she's looking good. So here's everything that I have done up until this point.
Before I started making anything, I had to take over one of my school's many printer rooms to print out and assemble all of the pattern pieces. My poor carpet did not know peace for weeks because I was getting all of this together. The main fabric that I used for this project was red and blue crushed velvet. I loved the texture of this fabric, and I really wanted this outfit to feel like it would be found on a toy or a doll. Cutting it out was a little difficult because the little bits of velvet would get cut off every time I trimmed anything, so I would have to trace and cut the pattern pieces on the wrong side of the fabric to prevent as much fallout as possible from happening.
So pros and cons to using crushed velvet for the majority of this project. Pros, I could just hold on to all of my scraps and pieces and just, it's very pleasant to the touch. So until I actually can pin them together, I can just kind of make biscuits with them. Cons, there's little bits of velvet all over my carpet now, and I'm gonna have to vacuum this again tomorrow, even though I just vacuumed it today. So fun times. I've barely gotten footage of anything, and it's kind of impossible to get footage of a lot of this because it's just repetitively cutting, pinning, and sewing. But we'll make something unique out of this. I just don't know when that will start.
There's not a whole lot to talk about other than the measuring, cutting, pinning, and sewing of different parts of the costume. The first thing I worked on was the hat because I was really excited about the hat. I feel like that's the most iconic part, so I wanted to get it out of the way first. Possession of a vaguely hat-shaped object. There's only one problem, and it's that, it's huge. It's not as bad as I thought it was. I think because it printed a couple millimeters smaller, the issue of it being too big of a pattern isn't as prominent. However, this is still like a 32-33 inch circumference, and it needs to be more like 25 to fit my head in a wig. So my plan to fix that is to take in the seam allowance on the center seam by a couple more millimeters, and then to slightly gather around the brim before I sew on the felt. Taking the center seam of the hat in is a pretty self-explanatory process. I just unpinned where the seam was before and moved the seam allowance down further. Gathering is also self-explanatory, but a lot more tedious. I had to sew a single thread all the way around the rim of the hat and then pull it tight and then unpull it so it would fit around the shape of my head and tie off the end of the string so it would stay in that shape forever. Then I used some yellow craft felt to actually create the rim of the hat. It was nice and thick and soft, and I used this really nice invisible stitch to hide all of the raw edges.
Just look at how clean that is. You cannot see it on the other side at all. I am so proud of that. Look at that. Look at that.
Weird angle. I'm sorry, my tripod is packed for break. Hat. Right now, it looks only slightly ugly because it doesn't have the pom-poms. Other than that, it is shaped. It has a band, and it fits over my head with enough leeway for wig when I actually have the wig. So I'm calling this a win, and this took about 5 days. So I don't know if I'm actually going to get the rest of this costume done over break, but I plan to make significant progress.
Said significant progress began with adding on those pom-poms. These were a little tricky to sew because the pom-poms aren't very solid, so passing a needle and thread through was a lot of flipping the hat inside out and outside in, but it is so cute. It just pulls the whole thing together and it's so fun to play it. I love batting it around like a little cat. Here is what the hat looks like with the wig. You might remember this wig was a very lucky thrift find, and I'm so glad I kept it because it is perfect. Then it was time to start making the actual base outfit. The first thing I started putting together was the bodysuit. Coming from a dance background and having worn a lot of leotards and bodysuits in my life, I thought I would have a better understanding of how this worked, but I really didn't. It was a little bit tricky to put together at first, but I got it eventually. It was just a fun game of jigsaw puzzles. I don't know. There is something inherently satisfying about pinning seams together.
But put it over my head like this. See where things land. Yeah, she's gotta get taken in a bit. I can't do anything about her right now. First, I'm gonna sew the shoulders and the fronts together.
And thus began several more hours of hand sewing. I didn't take a lot of footage of this because I was busy using all of that time sewing, watching other media, such as Digital Circus Episode 3. I wasn't too concerned about the cleanliness of the stitches, just the fact that they got done and they made the piece stay together. And I alternated between red and blue depending on whichever I thought fit the area the best. Once the front and sleeves were sewn together, I tried it on my body again and pinned the sides so it would be slightly more form-fitting to my waist. The pattern printed out slightly bigger than it was supposed to for the bodysuit, I believe, so I had a lot of excess seam allowance that I had to taper off and get rid of. So I used a lot of pins, stabbed myself a lot less than I thought I was going to. Proud of myself on that part. But then I sewed it along the pin line and cut off all of that excess to be tossed aside for something else. Maybe garbage. I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna attempt to multitask. I'm going to try and sew a zipper, which I'm certain I'm not doing the proper way, but it's, as long as it's functional, it's fine. And I'm going to listen and spot check my full recital rep.
The zipper was slightly easier than I expected. Just the material that wasn't the zipper teeth was very difficult to sew through. I zoned out otherwise, just singing my recital pieces as I was sewing this on. This footage went on for like 50 minutes and I completely forgot that I was even recording for half of it. I was just singing my silly little songs, sewing like some kind of cottagecore dream, except the cottagecore dream involves a clown costume.
Okay. From the outside, it looks like a presentable zipper. I would just need to tack the bottom. Let's go! I did it! It's a functional zipper! Yay!
After my brief victory celebration, I could go back and sew up the rest of the bottom of the bodysuit. I just needed to do the small bit of the back after the zipper and the crotch.
Okay, even after taking it in at the waist, it's still a little roomy everywhere. I think once I add sleeves and legs, that will change. But for now, I am content.
While working on the sleeves, I noticed a problem that I was having throughout this was that I was cutting my threads too short, so I devised a little method on how to not do that. First, I rolled out a single piece of thread as long as the section of the garment I was sewing, then I would continue unraveling thread until I had double the length and then some. This ensured that I would have enough to pass through the entire garment, as well as have enough to tie my final knot on the end. You can see with this example that this was the perfect amount.
And for my next trick, I am going to make this giant bell sleeve disappear.
Just look at that gathering. It really is like magic. Once the sleeve was fitted to a place on my arm where I wanted it to sit, I added the same felt encasing that I did on the hat. I loved working with this felt, except for the parts where you passed the needle through it too many times and too much felt got stuck on it. My poor desk was also a victim of this project's mess.
And here's what I have right now. The last thing I did before I remembered I had to record this intro was sewed on the collar. This was way more infuriating than it had to be, because the instructions said to cut on the fold, and I cut on the fold, but then I couldn't open the zipper anymore, so I had to do some thingies to it. Also, the knots wouldn't knot. Same encasing technique that I've done for every other yellow felt piece. Where we stand, the whole costume is about 2/3 of the way done. And starting this week, I need to make pants. Or at least some kind of legs to go on this thing. Hello down there. So, I'm making some pants right now. But I don't want to talk about pants right away. When the idea first came to me to create this Pomni cosplay, I looked at reference work and tutorials from various different creators, but I especially took inspiration from Sarah Spaceman. Sarah has a free pattern on her Patreon that I printed out as the basis for this project that I just altered where need be. In her pattern, however, the pants have these pillow supports on the thighs, so they're supposed to bubble out kind of like this. And I'm not in a position where I could make those kind of supports. So my dilemma was, how was I going to make sure these pants weren't too horrifically big and droopy while still not being too small for my body? I just sent her a message on Discord asking for some advice on how to go about it. And now I am going to follow that advice. And I'm going to take these color block panels and reduce the amount I need to cut from 5 per color to 3. So it will still have the same pattern, there will just be less, and therefore have a smaller circumference.
Pretty much all of the pants assembly was done off camera, but the less pattern pieces technique worked so much better. They didn't feel floppy or droopy, but still round and silly enough.
Let's flip these pants. Just to see what they look like. Large. I don't like them right now, but I think that's because they haven't been fitted to proper pant size yet. My goal before dinner today is to add a waistband to that with elastic, and I ideally want it to sit about where my pockets begin on these jeans, so like right at my hip bone. So I'm gonna cut this piece of elastic out, wrap some fabric around it, and see if I can make something wearable out of this thing. Woo!
This is one of those moments where I wish I owned a sewing machine. Because this took 15 minutes alone to pin, and it's probably going to take twice that to actually fasten. I love doing these things to myself so much. Oh, naive past me. Pinning and sewing the waistband on was nothing. The real issue was feeding that elastic into it and gathering it. You thought gathering the hat and the sleeves and the cuffs of your pants was hard? This was so tedious. Plus, you had the extra thing of sewing the waistband back together where you cut it. I mean, I think it turned out fine in the end, but oh boy, that was definitely a process. Oh?
Silly man pants. I'm so relieved. So relieved.
Of course, before I added any of the extra decorations, I had to try it all on and make sure it actually fit me and was wearable, and thank God it was. I celebrated so hard.
In incredibly fantastic news, I have a functional garment! I think I only heard like 1 or 2 threads pop that I'm gonna need to check on, and the hip line on this bodysuit is a little bit high, but that can easily be fixed when I add the lining to these holes in the bodysuit. So other than that, yes. Oh, the big part is over and I can just decorate and be fancy now. The legs are also uneven, but I honestly don't care about them as long as they stay on. If I want to fix them before I wear this to like Zenkai or something, I will. But for now, this costume's only purpose is to be wearable. And I think I would call that a win. So, I'm gonna cut some felt strips for this part and start going crazy.
For the hip rolls, I cut out some very long folded felt strips. I initially was going to make 2 less thick ones of these, but after making the first one and folding it in half, I realized that I liked that length a lot better. So I used the first one as a basis for the second.
You know what I probably should have done now that I'm sitting here looking at my perfectly pinned tubes? I should have pinned them right to the crotch.
So then I spent 10 minutes unpinning and repinning the hip rolls onto the bodysuit. And of course came even more sewing and listening to whatever media was on at the moment. Enjoy some nice, chill sewing vibes. After the hip rolls came the giant yellow buttons. These are one of the most fun elements of the cosplay, I think. I am not the best at sewing buttons, but I love how even these turned out. I also was supposed to make gloves, but these gloves were the banes of my existence. I tried making 2 separate pairs. The first one, I didn't add enough seam allowance, and after cutting them out, they were way too small and couldn't even get over my fingers. You'll see that in a second. And the second pair, I had enough seam allowance, just not enough fabric, and holes kept popping up every other place in the seam. So I decided to just give up on them. Maybe I'll give these away as like a gag Christmas present or something. I mean, just look at how silly they are. In a perfect world, these would be perfect. However, it's not a perfect world. Thankfully, I had a solution and sorted through all of the scraps from these failed attempts and made these little wristbands instead that had this amazing trim. The trim, it's my favorite part of the whole costume because it has the same little pom-poms as on the hat, and oh my god, I just love it so much. I didn't have enough to use on every piece of yellow that I wanted to, but I was able to put some on the sleeves and some on my shoes. They aren't sewn on permanently because I wear these shoes with other outfits a lot, but they just worked so well and I had the perfect enough length. I'd really love to add more shoe modifications to cosplays in the future. They are just so fun, underrated part of costuming.
We're gonna make up and talk. Need to do a test run before I wear this anywhere. So, the build for this costume. What worked, what didn't, and all that jazz. I need to organize this again. Oh my god. So obviously, this is my first entirely hand sewn thing. I'm not altering any pre-existing pieces of clothing. This was completely made from scratch. And I know for a fact that I didn't do some of the technical things that I should have done correctly. If parts of this start tearing and coming apart at the seams, I will not be surprised. However, I think I did them in a way that fixing them will not be difficult at all. I need to pull up my makeup board. I'm still pretty impressed with myself by the fact that I managed to even make something that looks as good as it does. Is it polished? No. Is it cleanly sewn? No. Is it together? Yes. And sometimes, honestly, that's all that matters. The fact that you can make a thing and it exists. I still don't have anywhere to wear it yet, sadly, but we're working on that. Halloween is still a week away of the day that I'm doing this test run, so I would not be shocked if like within 48 hours I get invited to some kind of costume party. But yeah, this was a good learning experience. It's been a very busy season in my life with school. So having this little project to work on in between all of the school moments has been quite a stress reliever, surprisingly enough. Like, sewing is frustrating sometimes. I will not doubt that. But having something to put my creative energy into to keep me from losing my marbles is great. And now I'm not gonna have that until I come up with my next idea. And I'm gonna miss that. But for now, I have a Halloween costume that I am proud of and that I am very excited to wear in public because I love it. And for just a couple of hours on Halloween night, I'll be whisked away into an amazing digital world.